The topic of today's lesson is going to be focused on some myths and legends regarding the Middle Ages. So how many times you think that history has been a telephone game where the knowledge that is passed along from one century to the next somehow has been, even the misinterpretation of one person can make something that is completely different into knowledge and evidence that is really taken for something that is true in the end and that has been passed on and on. So, for example, I always tell myself, so during my translation studies when I was in Italy, we said that tradurre vuol dire tradire. That means to translate, it means to betray. Because if you think about it, the original text is when you translate something from one language to another one, you need to adopt a totally different mindset and line of thought, because the way an English person thinks is different from an Italian, at least until to the linguistic and semantic point of views to that regard. So to betray the original text because somehow you altered the meaning of something. There is nothing. There's something that is so different, and I think that has happened in history as well. Because when you have people, they try to interpret the actions and the motivation of something that happened in the past, it can be misinterpreted. Therefore, it can be misaligned to the original intent. And so today we're just going to talk about some myths about the Middle Ages, at least 3. So the idea that the Middle Ages were a dark, superstitious, and cruel time is a myth that deserves to be challenged. In reality, this period was marked by economic growth, artistic achievement, and intellectual creativity. Why should we give up the exciting and mysterious image of the Middle Ages? After all, similar to what we see in Game of Thrones, for example, when we explore different things from a different era, we can appreciate their history because they inspire our imagination. The main point is that we don't have to let go of these images because somehow we're fascinated by the Dark Ages, the dark times, the different mentality that happened in the Middle Ages. But when we talk about the Middle Ages, we can mean two different things. The actual experiences of our ancestors and the romanticized version that has evolved over time. Most of our ancestors lived through a long and complex period that had its highs and lows, just like any other era in history. So understanding both perspectives can give us a better view of these fascinating times. One of the most common legends about the Middle Ages is the jus Primae Noctis, the supposed right of a lord to spend his first night with his vassal's bride, or even the peasantry to that extent. And this idea paints a distorted picture of the Middle Ages, the medieval life, because this practice has been historically documented, but we will see why there are some misconceptions. Another myth is the belief that the Middle Ages thought that the Earth was flat. In reality, their understanding of geography and astronomy was much more advanced than many people think. Another legend is the so-called terrors of the year 1000. It is said that as the year 1000 approached, many feared that the world was about to end. This myth is vividly described by an author and a famous historical character, Italian, Giosuè Carducci, who portrays people in panic, seeking refuge in monasteries while awaiting the apocalypse. However, a look at historical records from that time reveals no evidence of such widespread fear. For instance, on December 31st, 999, Pope Sylvester II issued a guaranteed diploma to the monastery of Fulda, while Emperor Otto III granted lands to one of his vassals, asking for a white horse in return by May of the next year. These actions clearly showed that neither the Pope nor the Emperor believed the next day would be anything but normal. This challenges the image of a humanity frozen in fear, revealing a much more complex and lively historical period than the legends imply. In conclusion, the Middle Ages were not a dark and superstitious time we often think they were. Instead, this era was full of discoveries, innovations, and intellectual energy that helped shape the modern world. It is important to rethink these myths and recognize the richness and vitality of this historical period. Another thing that is very important, it's remarkable to discover that the Middle Ages were not the dark, superstitious, and cruel time we often believe them to be. Instead, this era was marked by economic growth, artistic achievements, and intellectual creativity. When a historian shared this perspective with a group of high school teachers in an event, one teacher raised their hands and asked, "Sure," he says, "the Middle Ages may have been as you described, but the dark, mystical, and superstitious version is much more captivating because that's what people like to think. That's what people like to have in their imagination. Why should we let go of the image just because you say it wasn't true?" When asked. The key point is that we don't have to abandon these captivating images of the Middle Ages. But when we talk about this era, it can mean two things. One is the reality of what the ancestors experienced during that time. And it's worth noting that most of them who lived through the Middle Ages, which spanned over a long period, and you have like over 30 generations of our great-parents that experienced this era. And during that time, the world was inhabited, and it was a little version that the Middle Ages we created in our head was different, because we have all these people that went through the highs and lows, and we need to think also regarding their perspective. And when we come, like, we have had real people with real lives that lived that period, and we have heard about the Middle Ages from clerics and the nobility. They were the only ones who were able to write. However, how many other millions of people we did not hear from who were peasants, who did not have literacy? Therefore, our perception of the Middle Ages might be also a little bit altered due to that perception. In this reimagined version of the Middle Ages, on the other side, we can think about witches who were constantly burned. And in reality, when we think about it, about the witch trials, because we have this imagination that we think, oh, we also had the witches during that time. So they were, because due to the dark times, due to the fact of working and praying in order to guarantee yourself an afterlife. But in reality, the example of the witches, they were much closer to the times of Michelangelo, Galileo, and Newton than actually in the Middle Ages. So our perception has been really, really changed about that historical period. The Middle Ages is often seen as a time filled with superstition, where people believed in magic, amulets, and spells. However, the ancient Romans were just as superstitious. When we think of the Romans, we don't typically associate them with such beliefs, even though archaeological finds show us dolls pierced with pins, symbols of the very same superstitions that we often link to the Middle Ages. In reality, the image of the superstitious and irrational Middle Ages, where the church supposedly fought every attempt to break free from darkness, doesn't always match the facts. The final centuries of the Middle Ages were marked by the church's teaching that the world was created in a rational manner, and that reason was what set humans apart. According to this belief, we possess reason because we are made in the image of God, who endowed us with this gift to distinguish us from animals. As a consequence, the world itself is seen as rational and understandable. Not only was the world seen as rational, but even the concept of evil was considered rational. In the later centuries of the Middle Ages, there was a fascination with the idea that religious faith, which in modern times is often viewed as separate from reason and science, could be fully understood. People believed it was unthinkable not to find explanation for their faith. They thought that since God created the world, it must be beautiful, just, organized, and rational, and that humans were meant to comprehend it. This perspective contains sharply with our usual notions of the Middle Ages, but it reflects the views held by those who lived during that time. Today, I want to tackle, as I already mentioned, 3 common legends about the Middle Ages to show that they're just that, legends. Let's start from the first one, the terrors of the year 1000. The terrors of the year 1000 refer to the belief that people in the Middle Ages feared that the world was about to end. As the new millennium approached, many Christians in Europe anticipated an apocalypse with the arrival of the year 1000. Now we have this author, Giosuè Carducci, vividly captured this idea in his depiction of the sunrise of the first day of the new millennium, imagining it as a miraculous event symbolizing hope and new life for the generations emerging from the 10th century. Giosuè Carducci is a very particular name to pronounce. Giosuè Carducci is a notable Italian poet, writer, and literary critic from the 19th century, widely regarded as one of Italy's most significant literary figures, who received a Nobel Prize in literature, but in 1906. So he talks about 10th century while he was living 9th century apart. So that's the perceptions that I was mentioning to you earlier. Carducci's work often featured nationalistic themes and reflected on history and literature. In the context of the terrors of the year 1000, his writings provide a literary interpretation rather than a strict historical account, illustrating how the sphere of the apocalypse was perceived during that time. Carducci illustrates how, as the year 1000 approached, preachers instilled fear in the populace with declarations like 1,000, no more than 1,000. The world will last 1,000 years after Christ's coming and no more. So as soon as the year 1000 arrives, the world will end. His generation believed that as the new millennium neared, people ceased the daily work and sought refuge in monasteries, spending the final days of 99th year anxiously awaiting the apocalypse. On the morning of January 1st, 1000, Carducci describes the overwhelming joy and astonishment that erupted among the crowds. Previously, these people had gathered silently around feudal manors, weeping in dark churches and cloisters. But that morning, when the eternal sun, symbol of light and life, rose triumphantly, they erupted in celebration. Carducci wrote this in 1868 at the start of his first lecture on the evolution of national literature, viewing Italian literature as a mirror of the entire modern world. So he argued that this modern era began on January 1st of the year 1000, when people realized the world had not ended. This realization led them to return to work, transforming, damn it, we need to go back to work. Nobody died, nobody perished, the world didn't end. I guess how many of those people were really upset to go back to work, especially the peasantry that were expected to have a life of hard labor. No water, no running water, no electricity, nothing, just substance from the earth. While the nobility collected rent and the monasteries just preached the word of God. So you can understand how that word was separated in different classes. This realization led them to return to work, transforming the previously dark closed an ominous period of anticipation into one of creativity and initiative. Carducci imagined tearful crowds filling cloisters in the final months of 999, anxiously awaiting the apocalypse. However, this notion was not unique to Carducci. It was widely accepted. So there was a long thread of literary authors who attributed the year 1000 to the apocalypse. For instance, a French history book from the 19th century states, "The belief in the end of the world, justified by plagues, famines, and various calamities afflicting Europe, caused a universal lethargy. Everything was frozen in fear while awaiting for the fateful day. All activity ceased, every movement stopped, and hope for the future vanished, leading to an increase in religious fervor. People flocked to monasteries, donated their possessions to the church, and everywhere echoed a gloomy cry, 'The end of the world is near.'" We can check historical records to see if people were genuinely terrified as the year 1000 approached, because you need to take into account that the literary interpretations and the facts were two different things. But we have seen in other places how the literary interpretations, like in the episode of the plague that described with vivid reality what really happened during the plague, and we were able to catch a glimpse of that era. In this case, instead, we have an interpretation that it drives us away from what really happened. Why? Because we have actual documents that prove the difference. And when we check historical records to see if they were really terrified of the year 1000, remarkably, not a single chronicler from that era mentions any widespread fear. One may argue, sure, chroniclers often focus on politics, so maybe they overlooked this. Well, that's possible, especially since once the anticipated apocalypse didn't happen, they may have thought it wasn't worth mentioning. However, we can uncover more about how people felt in those final days of the 999 year. For instance, on December 31st, 999, Pope Sylvester II issued a guaranteed diploma to the monastery of Fulda, a prominent German monastery, at the abbot's request. In this document, the Pope assured that the monastery would keep its properties for the future. If the war were about to end the next day, would he have made such a declaration? His assurance showed that neither he nor the abbot of Fulda had the slightest doubt that the following day would be just like any other. Additionally, on December 31st, 999, Emperor Otto III issued a diploma granting lands to one of his vassals, asking for a white horse in return. While the reason for the white horse is not particularly important, the context is noteworthy, because the emperor stated, "Today I give you these lands in return. You will provide me with a white horse at the beginning of next May." This clearly indicates that he expected the world to continue as usual, just like any other day, without any imminent apocalypse. If there was an impending apocalypse, would the Pope and the Emperor be making those long-term agreements for the future? In the year 1000, many people in Europe were anxious about the possibility of the war ending, partly due to religious beliefs and the notion that the millennium would bring about significant change or even the apocalypse. Similarly, a millennium later, as the year 2000 approached, we had the Y2K bug, the year 2000 bug, so caused by widespread concern that computers and technology will fail to date formatting issues, potentially leading to chaos in various systems. Both periods reflect a societal tendency to fear major transitions, especially those tied to time and significant numerical milestones. This raised fear of widespread system malfunctions in the 2000s in areas like banking, utilities, and transportation, leading to panic about potential disruptions. To mitigate the risks, businesses and governments invested heavily in updating and testing their systems. Ultimately, the extensive reparation I crashed everything here. Helped prevent significant problems. When the new millennium arrived, the Y2K bug largely turned out to be a non-issue. But going back to the Middle Ages, 1,000 years back in time, there have been instances where complaints from the peasants against their lords were very common. And here we go to close to myth number 2. So throughout history, there are countless records of grievances, and they're documented in legal briefs written in Latin, where peasants outlined issues with their lordships. There are numerous cases following uprising and revolts, and even documents in which the lords concede to the demands of their vassals. Yet, despite many complaints, not a single instance in these records mentions jus primae noctis, the supposed right of the lords to bet the vassal's bride. If this practice were indeed widespread and troubling to the peasants, surely one of them would have brought it up. But the absence of such claims in their complaints further debunks the myth of jus primae noctis as a prevalent aspect of medieval life. At this point, one might reasonably ask, when did people start talking about these myths? Well, it's true that these ideas aren't found in medieval writings, but they begin to emerge at the end of the Middle Ages. Surprisingly, the topic arises from chroniclers in the 15th century, who record how terrible the ancient times were for their great-grandparents. They portrayed the lords of old as wicked figures who demanded everything and took liberties with their vassals' daughters, claiming it was their right. What's interesting is that this reflects a common human tendency to romanticize and vilify the past, just as we today often imagine the Middle Ages as a time filled with horrors. Providing a sense of relief that those times are over, these chroniclers did the same. They crafted narratives about a distant past full of dreadful events, serving as a repository for their imaginations. As time went on, jurists from the Renaissance and the modern age began to take these stories seriously. They approached historical documents with a credulous mindset, interpreting them through their own perspectives. This led to the further entrenchment of myths, and their interpretation shaped how we view the Middle Ages today. For example, do you know what a collection is? It's the act of raising money. In the Middle Ages, the term was often used to describe taxes imposed by lords. Each family had to contribute a share, especially when the lord needed funds for something significant, like going on crusades or battles. We collect money. Collect. Officially, this was referred as a collection. In Italian, it's straightforward. Colletta. In Latin, it's collecta. In French, the word is collier, and meaning to gather, all of these. Different dialects had their own variation, and local notaries would translate these terms into Latin in various ways. At some point, documents began to surface, stating that the lord collected a tax called cullagium. What is cullagium? What is cullagium? Where the 16th century jurists discovered these old records, they interpreted them within their own context, assuming a connection to the jus primae noctis. Something you might find amusing is the fact that in Italian, the word culo is a colloquial term that means butt or rear end. But the similarity between cullagium and culo is coincidental, as they come from different linguistic and historical contexts. Cullagium was a historical term referring to a specific tax or fee imposed in medieval and early modern European contexts, particularly in areas influenced by feudal systems. In the early 15th century, the bourgeois of Amiens agreed to pay a specific sum to their bishop to redeem themselves from the supposed tax of the first knight. Essentially, they were paying a kind of subscription fee to eliminate this alleged charge. Let's dig deeper here. For centuries, Jurists and later historians have examined these documents, which detail civil cases involving disputes over taxes. Initially, there is a trial, followed by an agreement where individuals pay to redeem themselves from the supposed tax of the first night. In Amiens, where the lordship belonged to the bishop, people paid the bishop for this. Historians, encountering these lengthy documents written in Latin, often concluded, it's a tax for the first night. It's clear that people paid to avoid this charge. They assumed the bishop was collecting the ius Primae Noctis. However, a closer reading reveals a different story. The bishop envisioned a beautiful idea. He believed that Christian marriage, occurring in a world where such unions were controlled by the church, was not meant to satisfy animal desires, but was a noble and sublime bond between two souls. To emphasize this, he proposed that in the city of Amiens, couple should take a vow during their marriage ceremony to refrain from consummating their marriage for the first 3 nights. This was intended to show that their union was not driven by mere animalistic urges. In the city of Amiens, when couples got married, they were expected to refrain from consummating their marriage for the first 3 days. This practice was rooted in the belief that it honored their Christian purity. However, since people in the Middle Ages were practical and often looked for ways to navigate obligation, the inhabitants eventually approached the bishop of Amiens with a proposal. Instead of this requirement to abstain from the first 3 nights, couldn't we pay a fee to avoid it? The bishop agreed this arrangement, following couples to redeem themselves for the obligation. As a result, what began as a vow of abstinence transformed over time into the idea of the ius Primae Noctis, the supposed right of the Lord to bed the bride on her wedding night. This shift illustrates how a practice intended to uphold Christian values became distorted into a myth about medieval life. Essentially, the ius Primae Noctis symbolizes our longing to envision a past we believe we have happily left behind. For many, the Middle Ages embody that dark, oppressive era. The sentiment is evident in the common refrain that surfaces whenever we encounter something we dislike. We're back in the Middle Ages, or it feels like we're returning back to the Middle Ages, as to denote a time where things were worse. And whenever there's something that does not fit our current comforts, we think that, oh, we're going back to that tumultuous and dark time, These expressions reveal how deeply ingrained this notion of a green past is in our collective consciousness. An extraordinary phenomenon of this reinvention of the past is, for example, take George Orwell's 1984, for example. In this dystopian future, society is completely controlled by a totalitarian regime that even rewrites history to suit its narrative. In 1984, there's this moment when history books describe a terrible capitalist era, claiming that during that time there was something called ius Primae Noctis, a law allowing capitalists to sleep with all the female workers in their factories. This illustrates a crucial point. The way we invent a past is often designed to serve our current beliefs and perceptions. We shape historical narratives to fit our understanding of the present, highlighting how our reviews can influence our interpretations of history. Finally, let's address one more widely held belief. The idea that people in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat. Wow. I don't know how hard it's going to be this for all the flat earthers here in the United States. This misconception persists even today, likely because it aligns with the image of the Middle Ages as a time of ignorance and superstition. The flat earth myth is often linked to the portrayal of prejudiced monks rejecting scientific truth and is commonly associated with the struggles Galileo faced when he proposed that the earth moves. This stereotype has deeply embedded itself in popular culture, even though it doesn't reflect the reality of medieval knowledge. Let me give you an example. In the classic Disney animated movie, The Sword and the Stone, I think it was made in the 1969 or 70. I don't know, must be even more recent. The Sword and the Stone. Merlin, the wise wizard who travels through time, instructs his disciple, young Ward, the future King Arthur. At one point, Merlin returns from a trip to the future, sporting Bermuda shorts and sunglasses, having just visited Malibu Beach. One of the things Merlin teaches Ward is that ignorant medieval world is what ignorant that medieval world is, and discovered. And he says, one day David will discover that the earth is round. This seems plain to the stereotype of the Middle Ages as a time when people believed the earth was flat, and that it took modern wisdom to correct this misconception. However, this portrayal is far from accurate. In reality, knowledge of the earth's spherical shape dates back to the Greeks, as early as the 4th century BC. Greek scholars, followed by the Romans, understood that the earth was round. Figures like Ptolemy developed astronomical systems that clearly described the planets and earth as spherical. And this knowledge persisted in textbooks for centuries. The idea that medieval people believed that earth was flat is a myth, yet it remains popular in modern culture because it fits neatly with the image of the dark and ignorant Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, the notion that the earth was flat simply did not exist. Medieval scholars and theologians, when discussing the realms of living and afterlife, structures these discussions around the belief in a spherical earth. For example, depictions of paradise as being above and hell as below mirror the understanding of a round earth. And just as we see many religious texts, if the earth were flat, how could they imagine hell located beneath the earth? This belief in a round earth shaped even theological debates and cosmological concepts of the time. One striking example from the 15th century comes from the famous Florentine astronomer and cartographer Paolo Toscanelli, who suggested to Christopher Columbus, "Why don't you sail west to reach the Indies? I'll make you a map because the earth is round." Toscanelli's letter reflects a basic understanding among educated people of that time that the earth was spherical. The widespread myth that people believed in a flat earth during the Middle Ages largely stems from the 19th century historian Washington Irving. In 1828, in his 1828 biography of Columbus, Irving incorrectly describes an era of ignorance, claiming that most people thought the earth was flat until Columbus set out to prove otherwise. This myth, though historically inaccurate, has been perpetuated in popular culture ever since. Even in places like New York, it's challenging to dispel persistent myths. In his biography, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus, Washington Irving presents the Middle Ages as a period of ignorance and superstition. He contrasts this with the Renaissance, which he views as a time of enlightenment and progress. So Irving's portrayal reflects a common perspective of his time, which tended to romanticize the Renaissance while characterizing the Middle Ages as dark and a backward era. In Irving's biography of Christopher Columbus, he depicted Columbus as fighting against the superstitions of his contemporaries, reinforcing the legend of the ignorant Middle Ages. This myth, particularly the idea that people in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat, had endured over time. And here we are, working to free the Middle Ages from such misconceptions. It's well documented that medieval scholars never doubted the earth's roundness. They considered it self-evident. If you're still skeptical, there's visual proof in countless medieval depictions of emperors, whether it's Charlemagne, Frederick Barbarossa, or a Byzantine emperor. They are often portrayed holding a globe in their right hand as a symbol of their Christian Roman Empire's divine right to rule the world. Sometimes there's even a cross on top of the globe, symbolizing the spread of Christianity across the entire spherical world. This imagery along debunks the flat earth myth, but we also find references of the earth's shape in medieval treatises and astronomy, proving that this was common knowledge among the educated. The idea of a flat earth is nothing more than a modern invention, created and perpetuated to falsely characterize the Middle Ages as an era of ignorance. The earth, the sky, the sun, the stars, and even comets have long been subjects of interest, even during what are often called the darkest centuries, after the barbarian invasions, when knowledge and technology were indeed in decline. Yet, even in such times, figures like the 8th century English monk Bede, B-E-D-E, emerged. His work, De Natura Rerum, on the nature of things, Bede wrote, "We call the earth a globe, not because there are no irregularities or plains and mountains, but because if we consider the whole, the circumference of the earth represents a perfect and round globe. This demonstrates that even in the so-called Dark Ages, scholars had a sophisticated understanding of the earth's shape. From this perspective, the monk brings a subtle language issue. Today, we take for granted the idea that the earth is round, but this word can be problematic, as something round can still be flat, like a pizza, for example. But there's an old comic strip that humorously touches on this. The Wizard of Oz. This wizard says that with the evil king, he says, "The earth is round, and it's also flat. I call it the pizza theory." While humorous, the comic pokes at the real challenge of explaining that round doesn't always mean spherical. So the monk Bede clarified this well, writing, "The earth is round, not like a shield, but like a ball." Medieval scholars went to great lengths to make this clear to a broader, less educated population, and they often used relatable metaphors and visual images, such as comparing the earth to a ball, or even as a fly walking on the surface of an apple, to help people understand the concept of a spherical earth. These efforts reflected the medieval endeavor to bridge complex ideas with everyday experiences to make learning accessible, even in times of great social and intellectual upheaval. The issue of whether people could live down on the side of the earth and at the antipodes, those with their feet directly opposite of ours, was indeed a perplexing one, not just in the Middle Ages, but also in antiquity, even though scholars like Pliny the Elder, and medieval thinkers explained that people on the opposite side wouldn't fall because gravity works the same for everyone. The common folk found this hard to accept. It was a clash between the learned and the less informed. How could someone down there not fall? That was the concept of the time. In medieval Europe, this idea continued to provoke curiosity and skepticism among the general population. Pliny the Elder had already addressed this clash in his writings, explaining that while common folk thought people on the other side would fall, scholars believed otherwise. He even humorously noted that those below might wonder why we don't fall off the earth. Despite these debates, the scholarly understanding of the Earth's shape continued to advance. By the year 1200, a key treatise on astronomy titled Tractatus de Sphera, Treatise on the Sphere, Tractatus de Sphera, it's written in Latin, This became the standard textbook in medieval universities across Europe. This work explained the Earth's spherical nature and the structure of the universe. It served as a foundational text for the study of geography long before the time of Columbus, offering a clear explanation on the Earth's shape and the workings of the cosmos. Far from being rejected by the Church, such works were incorporated into the curriculum at universities founded under Church authority. Now, theologians of the era, including the well-known St. Thomas Aquinas, engaged deeply with these concepts. In his monumental work, Summa Theologica, Aquinas began by reflecting on the nature of truth and how various sciences and disciplines approach it. He maintained that there was no fundamental conflict between faith and reason, or between theology and science. Aquinas believed that all truth, whether revealed or discovered through natural observation, formed a cohesive reality. This rational framework, embraced by thinkers like Aquinas, helped medieval scholars reconcile scientific discoveries with theological beliefs. And it also challenged the misconception that the Church suppressed scientific knowledge. On the contrary, during this time, the Church facilitated learning and the belief in a rational, ordered universe guided by both faith and reason, and being central to the medieval intellectual life. St. Thomas Aquinas, in his great work, Summa Theologica, makes an insightful distinction about how different disciplines arrive at truth through their own methods. Might this be the birth of the scientific method from Aquinas' point of view? I think so, yes. So he uses the roundness of the Earth as a simple, obvious truth to illustrate this. For instance, an astronomer might prove that the Earth is round by studying the motion of celestial bodies, while a physicist could demonstrate this by analyzing the refraction of light and other physical phenomena. This shows that even in the 13th century, the concept of a spherical Earth was so well established that Aquinas used it as an uncontroversial example of shared knowledge, and highlighting that, contrary to popular misconceptions, medieval scholars widely accepted and understood the Earth's roundness. Now, fast forward to the time of Columbus, and this knowledge remained uncontested. Columbus, when he approached Queen Isabella of Spain, wasn't pitching the idea of discovering a new world or proving the Earth was round. Instead, he proposed an alternative route to the Indies, which were known for their valuable spice trade. The Portuguese had already reached the Indies, navigating around Africa, but Columbus believed he could find a faster path by sailing westward. So based on the well-known fact that the Earth is round, he confidently claimed by heading west, he could eventually land in Japan, and thus establish a new trade route that would allow Spain to bypass Portuguese dominance. The Queen, intrigued by the potential to outsmart the Portuguese, was on board with the idea in theory. However, before committing resources, she appointed a commission to evaluate Columbus' plans. The commission didn't question the Earth's shape, as some later myths might suggest. Everyone knew it was round. Instead, they debated the logistics of Columbus' calculations, particularly whether the distance he had estimated was feasible given the limits of the ship's waters and supply that they could carry. Columbus, assured by his figures, convinced them to give him a chance, so leading to his famous voyage in 1492. What we learn from this is that the roundness of the Earth was never an issue. The real debate was about the size of the Earth and whether Columbus' journey was practical. The myth that Columbus set out to prove the Earth was round is just that, a myth, largely perpetuated by later historians. Instead, the real story is about the navigation, the trade, and the bold risk that Columbus took, not to discover new lands, but to find a new way to the riches of the East. The commission appointed by Queen Isabella to evaluate Columbus' proposal, overestimated the distance to Asia by a significant margin. While Columbus claimed it was about 2,400 miles, the Commission estimate around 18,000 miles and was much, much higher. The actual distance from the Canary Islands to Asia is about 10,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean. But the Commission did not account for the existence of the America. I don't think that was the Pacific Ocean. I assume it was through the Atlantic, if they were going westward or eastward. Either way, I think it was westward. So the Commission did not account for the existence of the Americas, which Columbus would encounter instead. Their overestimation reflected the limited geographical knowledge of the time and contributed to the skepticism about Columbus' plans. Now, given these discrepancies, we can tell with humor that nobody can accuse Columbus of being a great navigator. That's always what I like to say. But he's been a great man, a pioneer, I think, of his time. Columbus' miscalculations didn't change the outcome of his journey, which was one of the most pivotal moments in world history. His belief was that he would reach the Indies by sailing west was based on an underestimate of the Earth's circumference and an overestimation of Asia's size. So when he bumped into the Americas, he thought he had reached Asia, but in reality, he had stumbled upon an entirely new world that was unknown to Europeans. This mix of error and discovery highlights a deeper truth. Human exploration, whether geographical or intellectual, is often driven by wonder, curiosity, and a desire to challenge the boundaries of known knowledge. The sense of wonder, especially in the context of exploration and discovery, is deeply connected to humanity's enduring questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? These are not just philosophical musings, but they're very questions that drive scientific inquiry and exploration throughout history, from the Middle Ages to today. The quest for knowledge, for understanding the world around us, and for uncovering truths about the existent has been a consistent feature of human civilization. In the Middle Ages, this quest was shaped by both religious and scientific frameworks. Medieval scholars, despite being bound by certain theological constraints, were deeply engaged in these existential inquiries. They used knowledge passed down from the antiquity and built upon it on the natural world, theology, and philosophy. As we've seen, their understanding of concepts like the earth roundness, the structure of the cosmos, and the nature of reality was far more advanced than popular myths suggest. In this way, the Middle Ages were not a period of ignorance or superstition, but rather a time when humanity was actively grappling with the big questions of existence, questions that still inspire wonder and drive exploration today, whether through Columbus' voyages or the intellectual endeavors of medieval scholars. The pursuit of truth and meaning remains a constant thread in human history. So, given these facts here in regards to medieval myths, as you can see, history is written by those who are more apt and have the opportunity to explain things and recount facts according to their own perception. Now, either you knew about the jus Primae Noctis or the terrors of the year 1000 or the flat earth theory. I found it still astounding that people still, nowadays there's a flat earth society here in the United States, and that people still believe that the earth is flat. And that's insane, because even with our satellite technology, space travels, it's still unthinkable to imagine. And people think the earth is still flat to that extent. So what does this say? Well, this says that the human psyche sometimes cannot comprehend with certainty or make sense of certain facts. And I always think that, how do we react to new evidence? Well, we dismiss it. We think it's not possible, or we give it supernatural meaning to it later, or we address figurative speech with faith and with religion. When we don't know something, we're scared of it, afraid of new evidence. Well, and I think what consequent authors in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, 18th, 19th century tried to make sense of the past. Because most documentation or evidence has been lost, so what's left? They try to interpret those sources their own way. And I guess that's the same thing, that if there are apocalyptic events that will shape society and the world, many things will get lost. What do you think the chroniclers of the future will say about us? They will try to interpret and put pieces together as much as they can. And will they get it right? Well, I don't think so. That's the aspects of human nature. Even if I doubt that there will be some human nature back in the future, meaning that we'll fuse with machines and there will be total different things. However, aside from that, the perceptions of history change. It's a long, long line with generations, centuries, millennia coming by, and unless we have written evidence that certain facts have occurred, you can still have forgery. Why not? How many people in the later 14th and 15th centuries manufactured documentation or artifacts that were magically appeared in some excavation, portraying Roman emperor artifacts, of dubious nature, and proclaiming that they made a significant discovery. So forgery is also part of that, because human nature, there's always that thing of being recognized as the greatest. Historians, the greatest this, the greatest that. There's human greed in the mix as well. So who knows? But there is a pattern, a thread that connects all these points together in history, and we're able to ascertain if the truth regarding some claims and set aside others. Well, thank you for following and getting to the bottom of this with me, and I hope you've learned something. If you did, drop a like, comment, let me know if there's anything you liked or you didn't like, and accept criticism here in all forms and shapes. And I will see you next time. Thank you for being here. Bye.